We've been doing this podcast for 2.5 years now, and the most listened to episodes are always the ones talking about career and certifications in Treasury. So we decided to partner up with the AFP, the Association for Financial Professionals, so we can offer you a $100 discount code on all of the AFP's products. This includes, of course, the CTP, the Certified Treasury Professional, which is hands down the most renowned and recognized certification in Treasury out there. And of course, the access to the CTP exam prep platform as well. Check the link in the description to access to those discount codes and take your career to the next level.
Bob, thank you so much for coming on the show. So we want to touch on AI in Treasury. Something that is a huge buzzword in the world at the moment, and it's only a matter of time until Treasury also joins the hype of this revolutionary technology. So could you take us through what are the existing and potential use cases of AI in Treasury at the moment? Like starting at what's actually done today, but take it like as far as Sci-Fi will let us imagine Treasury could ever reach with AI.
Like the way you asked that, there's a lot of people that have a new imagination based on the proliferation of generative AI and ChatGPT over the past year. But before we get to all that fun, let's go backwards a little bit, because the origins of, I say AI, I almost want to say AI in quotes. I hate it when people do that, but I just did it anyways. AI, almost its origins in Treasury really go back to what is really rules-based automation. And it's the whole quest to how can I automate more of what I do today? So we've seen some of these burgeoning technologies like RPA, robotic process automation, which dare say some people call AI. A whole different conversation on that, but we'll just say for simplicity, we saw a lot of organizations look at what can I do with RPA to effectively connect systems, processes, even platforms that weren't connecting already. So that's where we saw where vendors were maybe doing it. You had maybe your SAP and Oracle, and you didn't have a connected ecosystem. And as a result, what happened is that you needed some sort of additional automation. That's where we entered things like RPA. You would have IT groups that said, oh, here's a bot. And then suddenly Treasury started having access to bots. And then we saw this wave of RPA enter in Treasury. Very positive thing. Like, I don't say anything bad about that, except that it's not AI. And so you would find these bots could only do what you asked it to. Now, maybe it can log into SAP or Oracle, find your perfect accounts payable or accounts receivable aging report, something you could use in your cash forecast, create that file export, be able to then make it available to your Treasury system, have the Treasury system, either its API or some sort of custom routine to import, process, and then view. And that series of steps, RPA was really good for, but we all know with dumb automation or programmatic automation, it only will do what you tell it to do, and it's not able to learn from anything. Certainly wasn't able to do anything with that data that you weren't able to predict. So take from that, I'll call it the very far left of the AI continuum, my opinion, off the continuum, but some people will say it's the very far left. We get into more machine learning. And machine learning, it's been around in Treasury, I don't know, I'm going to say 5 years. I'm sure I got checked by someone that says, no, it's been 6.5 or 7 or 8 or whatever. But let's just say it's been 5-ish years, and in its very infant state, in its early state, we were seeing it for very structured data. So data that was very organized and allowed us to make very simple conclusions, such as, let's look at accounts receivable as an example. Here's what accounts receivable data, like here's what our ERP system said in terms of our AR. And we think, we can probably do better than that based on some of the history and clearing patterns that we knew about in Treasury, such as this customer doesn't pay on time, this customer doesn't pay in full, they short pay, or whatever sort of things are going on within the receivable side. As a result, we may make some adjustments over the clearing date and the amount from a cash forecast perspective. We may say it's going to happen different time and it's going to be in a different amount. And as a result, we make that slight adjustment to our receivables forecast. That's something that's existed for a handful of years now, and it's basic machine learning. Nothing wrong with it. Like even today, you ask a treasurer, and we could, and they will say, "Ooh, I don't have that. That sounds very interesting." Like it's still a little bit of new age. And I think, this goes to your question of what are we seeing today? Well, we're seeing some technology that has been there for a little while, but we're not seeing it fully implemented, even for that basic use case. Now, let me throw another use case at you, because cash forecasting, it's almost too easy. Let's talk about fraud, payments fraud specifically. In payments fraud, the way that we like to compose, I like to call it a payments journey. So when I say a payments journey, what I mean is that it originates, whether it's Treasury, initiates in the AP system, Oracle, SAP, NetSuite, Microsoft, wherever. It's initiating somewhere. Then there's a journey for it to get to the bank. And yes, some people will say, oh, it doesn't need to go to a bank anymore because there's a variety of different, we'll call it payment networks. Fine. But in the end, we'll just call it simple ERP to bank. In that ERP to bank journey, there's a number of things that need to happen. One of those is screening against a set of rules or scenarios that you want built in to your, we'll call it compliance or governance process into that payment journey. So the examples, these aren't AI related, but they're just part of that payment journey. A lot of organizations like to do sanction list screening before it gets sent to the bank. That's a wonderful example because typically you just let the bank worry about it. But these days, we're finding that there's more of an interest in being able to understand, is this payment on a sanction list or is the beneficiary of the payment on a sanction list, yes or no? Same thing with bank account ownership. I want to validate that what's in my payment instruction actually is owned by the vendor that I think I'm paying in the case of a third-party payment. So these are just typical things with a payment journey that are very just, check a database, do a validation, use systems like LexisNexis, GAIAct, et cetera, that most treasurers are pretty familiar with. In the AI part, we probably have more of custom or at least more specific scenarios that a customer would have. So let's just look at maybe something as simple as if it's a duplicate payment, maybe it's the same amount in the same week, we should probably pull that out and have a little check. Just put a little quarantine, have a review, and make sure we actually have human eyes on it as opposed to just processing in a machine automated way. There might be other things. So let's just say we had a normal, regular type of payment sequence. Maybe it's weekly to that particular vendor or it was monthly or whatever the sequence was. And what we're trying to do is say, if there's anything outside of that scenario, like perhaps it's just, it's this week's payment to them, or is this month's payment to them, but it's just a little bit more. Maybe it's double the amount. Maybe it's 50% bigger, whatever the threshold. Some sort of governance around that just says this doesn't look normal. Now, if we think of AI, we don't need AI for some of those things. We can programmatically just use rules-based to say if it's 50% bigger payment than normal, check it, or whatever the threshold might be. Or if, our business typically is in North America, Canada, US, Mexico as an example, then, and this is a payment that's going to, North Korea, just for fun, then maybe that's something we want to yank out because it's not in those three countries we typically do business in. These are the sorts of scenarios that are very predictable and you can program. What's not so predictable is, we're going to call it more pattern-based. And is there enough about this payment that deviates from prior behavior? And that's where we get into AI at its infant level machine learning, maybe more cognitive AI, like a little bit more structured, where we're not actually looking at a certain field. We're just looking at the overall behavior. What we've been able to do is say, we've been able to train it, especially if we've never seen fraud in our organization, we've been able to train this as in, here's what a good payment looks like. Now, we haven't had fraud or we haven't had very much of it. We can't train it what a fraudulent payment looks like. So we have to kind of train it as good, not good, which sounds very double negative. And I totally appreciate that when I say it. But, I think we know what we mean there is that it is important to be able to use almost like an adversarial approach, which is a technique in data and artificial intelligence, to be able to identify what's a not good payment in addition to all of these different compliance checks and rules that I would have put in. And so what it gives us in a payments journey is we have our sanction list. Let's just pretend that was the thing that we wanted to do. We have our bank account ownership validation verification. We have our other sorts of scenarios, such as we don't pay vendors in North Korea. I'm picking on them today, but I'm just going to. We also have other scenarios such as it's a regular payment and this is an irregular some sort of characteristic, which again are all programmatic and there's a variety of those. Most organizations have dozens of those in their payment policy. Just scenarios that would maybe be something we need to look further at. And then we add on that layer of artificial intelligence to identify in total, but also in general, which I think is the bigger important piece here. In general, does this align with the types of payments and the behavior of those payments that we're typically used to sending? And I like to use this example because it allows us to understand, here's examples where we use APIs to vendors like Gaiac, LexisNexis, Microsoft, all these ones that the banks use as well. And then here's example of rules-based automation, which is very infant and certainly works in a nice scenario, but it has its limitations. And then here's where the continuum progresses so that we actually see the role of artificial intelligence in addition to these other types of technology. I know it's a very exhaustive way to kind of back into that answer, but that's what Treasury needs to think about when we look at what are the use cases for this? How can this help us? You need to understand, well, what doesn't it do? Or what doesn't it, artificial intelligence, what does AI not need to do for us that can be solved in different ways to then be very specific about the role of AI for things like payments or cash forecasts?
I didn't hear the Sci-Fi answer though, Bob. I think it was a great overview of like rule-based automation all the way to like, you know, what we are seeing today and the areas where it's already interesting to implement and then that principally should apply to it. But shoot for the moon here. Assume you could have a general AI, which I think most people today know is the North Star where AI is trying to go, but most people say will never reach, etc. What could a Treasury department achieve with something as far as that? Or just one step before?
Well, I think we can do many steps. So yes, let's dive into that. So if you look at our North Star, I think it's fair to say moved in the past 12 months. Even as we're going to recording this, later in the summer, what we saw at the end of 2022 was this rise of ChatGPT. And now there's a whole, we'll call it category, generative AI and large language models. This has changed the way that every treasurer that I work with, and even CFOs that are starting to get more involved as sort of chief data officers, informal title, but nonetheless involved in this management and having a data strategy for finance, they're starting to realize AI was this far away. I know it's hard to show visually, but you get the idea. There's some distance to where we were and AI, and no one, I don't say no one, but very few really had a good assessment and understand, what can AI do for me right now? The basic examples that we just went through, people would understand that, but even then they might not have been implementing it. ChatGPT suddenly, right in front of us, anyone literally could do it. You can just type in a question and it gives you an answer and you think, wow, that was wonderful. Now I can ask. And your brain starts working in terms of what could I do with this conversational type tool, which is almost like you said, what's one step away? What's the first vault forward we can use? Well, the first thing forward is to leverage the benefit of large language models and the automation that a chat GPT or generative AI allows. And what that would be is introduce that level of conversation into your treasury platforms. So as an example, ask, if you're using Power BI or Click or Tableau, asking that, why is my cash forecast wrong? Asking your treasury system, well, what's going on here? Explains this variance? When is the right time to go into the market and borrow? Depending on the large language model and the intelligence behind the scenes, which is still evolving today, you will get some sort of answer, which may be really good, or maybe we'll say room for improvement, but we're now recognizing the use case has become much more crystal clear in our vision. So we can go, I can understand that I could stop using my mouse right now, and I can envision that point where I start asking my treasury system questions. That technology exists today. There's tools. I'm not going to go promote anything that I'm doing at Kyriba, but we'll just say there's tools that allow that to happen, and it's not hard to do using these capabilities. And what that looks like is wherever you're consuming and organizing managed data, we'll call it like analytics is basically the category that I'm talking about, that practice and using analytics to make sense of the amount of data that treasurers have in front of them. You can start using ChatGPT and tools like it, whether they're embedded in your system or if they're not embedded in your system, you're just using by API, being able to then get them, the AI tool, access to your data and start asking questions of it. Tell me what I'm missing here. Tell me what I need to know. Help me find meaning in forecast variance. Why is this a fraudulent transaction? Why did you select this one into my quarantine for further review? These are the sorts of things, never mind just being able to automate and simplify the processing, filtering, and sorting of information. So we'll call that, to your question, what's the very next look like? That's what the very next looks like. The next beyond that is where it gets, I think, a bit more interesting, because just being able to throw away your mouse and start talking to your treasury system, and I say, but really talking to it. I mean, yes, right now you're typing, but we all know how to use Siri and things like that. It's just a moment before you start interacting verbally with it. That gets us somewhere, but it's the automation that you can build in terms of having these tools build the programming to then go to the next level. And it's that plus this concept of the large language model, which really is where we need a lot of evolution. That's where it's still a little bit infant. We look at in ChatGPT, it's a wonderful large language model. Every time we use it, we're training the model to make it bigger and bigger and bigger. This is, one would assume, the master vision behind what Microsoft wants to do with it is to basically productize it in a way that it could be available to improve your spreadsheets in Excel, improve your PowerPoint. Hey, ChatGPT, make my PowerPoint look way better than it does today. Like this sort of next level processing. If we apply that in that same thinking in Treasury, it would be not organizing and understanding or getting access to data, not having it present the data you already have in the system, but take that next level of tell me what I should do with this. Should I hedge this exposure, as an example? Should I actually borrow right now, given what Powell just said? Of course, I'm saying this when we're recording it. Powell probably said something different by the time we publish it. But point is that if we're holding on interest rates with the possibility of a little bit higher, what does that mean? Should we buy back our fixed rate debt now at a discount? Should we issue more debt? Should we actually stay short, given the shape of the yield curve? These are all decisions that Treasury needs expertise and experience to make. With the possibility of large language models, that allows us to go into that next level of AI actually giving us recommendations and, scarily enough, if you will, being able to automatically execute those within parameters or boundaries that you've set for it. The technology, in terms of what generative AI can do right now, has given us a view to what that looks like. I wouldn't say that every aspect of this technology is quite evolved enough and mature enough to allow CFOs and treasurers, who are obviously very analytical, very numbers oriented, and also very precise, to be comfortable in letting AI do that right now. But I think we've all seen in the past 12 months, I can see now where this is going. And obviously, I'm part of a vendor in terms of providing Treasury solutions. We saw the exact same thing, and it was immediately obvious to us what customers would rightly expect of their Treasury systems in the very near future. They expect conversational, they expect extra layer of automation, and they ultimately expect, maybe through APIs or maybe embedded right in the platform, the ability to leverage these in to drive more data-driven decision-making. So I know there's a lot to unpack there, but that's kind of what the next looks like. And as I said, you asked about what's that North Star. I don't think that was the North Star 12 months ago, before really ChatGPT became a bit more democratized. But it's certainly every financial team, whether it's Treasury, whether it's AP, whether it's controllers, whether it's the IT team within finance, which, by the way, gets really excited about this stuff, especially when they're trying to support their Treasury partners and say, hey, we really need this data lake. We really need these tools because we can start building AI into that. They're all thinking that way now.
Makes a lot of sense, Bob. So what will be the little name of my Kyriba system when I'll be able to talk to him or her, actually? If it's not Siri, what should I say? Hey.
It's a good question. I think that there's definitely room for branding. There's definitely room for marketing in this. I think in the end, whatever technology you're using for the actual, call it the speech part of it, the interaction, the engagement part of it, underlying it is going to be these layers of generative AI tools. Generative AI is absolutely that future. The fun part that I like anyway is that AI on its own is really nice, and it's a fun conversation, and it'll entertain us obviously through this podcast. But it's really about having a data strategy and having AI be able to be the recipient of that data. When I say the recipient of that data, I mean that we first need to make sure that we have APIs. APIs unify data around the enterprise. It allows us to have this pool of data that AI can then be, wow, AI, here I am. I get to jump on this data and start learning, whether it's structured, unstructured, both. That's where we're going to go with that. Then the APIs, this kind of gets back to your, is it a Siri embedded in your treasury system? Well, yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it's Siri. Maybe it's, Bard, I guess is Microsoft or Google, sorry. Whatever it is, whether it's third-party technology, whether it's basically proprietary technology, we know that's not too far away from us. I mean, right now, the pieces are all there, even if they're not composed in a way that most treasury teams are, they're not really talking to their systems, whether it's ERP, whether it's their apps, whether it's the trading portal, like FXall 360T, it's their, RFP software. I mean, there's a variety of tools, there's dozens of software applications that treasurers use. They're not composing all those pieces just yet. And that's where I say APIs are kind of a critical one. And I like to talk about them a lot because you need to have a data strategy and it needs to be based on what APIs are doing. And I don't mean for things like bank connectivity. Like that's a whole different discussion. Like whether you use APIs to connect to your banks or whether you use host to host, whether you use Swift. I'm not really fussed on that. Whatever the bank supports, what the bank supports. I'm talking about in terms of having your data. I want instant visibility into my cash. I want instant visibility into data surrounding the cash that comes from other parts of the organization. And I want that as a single repository so that I can ask the questions I want to ask either by voice, typed, using your mouse and keyboard, whatever means you want to use. So I can actually decide, here's what I want my algorithms, my artificial intelligence to learn from. APIs are the critical thing. If you don't have APIs, you don't have all the data you need. You certainly don't have it instantly enough to start having any sort of, I'll call it real-time treasury processing. You're going to be embargoed if you're not getting enough information available to you. So the actual pieces of it, Kyriba's platform, I mean, I can just say right now, it'd be called Kyriba, and whatever we embed is going to be called Kyriba something. But candidly, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to use third-party technology. Like every app that exists, Treasury is its own little ecosystem, but in fairness, it's part of a composite technology that surrounds the ERP as well. So these composable technologies, you're going to be utilizing third-party things. Like you're going to use the equivalent of a Siri or a Bard or something like that. You're going to use algorithms that are not completely provided by the vendor. You're going to use those through API as part of your journey. Just like we do on the payment fraud side. The examples when we talked about the payment journey, one of those, I mentioned like GAIACT, which is a very popular platform, early warning. That's the one that is going to be utilized by banks and probably by a lot of corporates. API needs to make that happen in a real-time view. So APIs are going to provide some elements of this technology. There's going to be IT groups that say, hey, we got our AI strategy all figured out for you, Treasury. All we need is to make sure that the Treasury system, the Treasury platform is API, like open API, so that we can make sure that all of this scripting is happening. All of this engagement is happening, the data is flowing in and out, so that whatever we are doing, whatever we need, can connect and can process in real time. That has to be the minimum base level standard. Without having that minimum base level, then you're going to be sitting there thinking, okay, I don't have the data I need, or I don't have all of the data I need, which is, a partial data problem is a problem because suddenly you're not giving it the full picture. You're not benefiting from some of the learning and application and generation of new data sets or augmenting the existing data that you really needed to do.
Yeah, and I like that you bring this topic actually. So I understand that API will be a major enabler of a powerful AI supported and powered treasury. What are the other challenges, if not limitations, of AI in general, but I guess what we are the most interested by is in Treasury. What are the challenges and then the limitations around this?
Yeah, so I'll reiterate the first one because it is the most important by far. And that's that you need to have a data strategy where you're very clear on what is your AI being trained on. Because in order to train it, typically, and I'll go back to sort of a more traditional machine learning type of algorithm, you need at least 10,000 data points to be able to train it to have reasonable, it's kind of like a survey. You need a reasonable sample size to make deductions. AI needs that sample size in order to make reasonable decisions or agitations about what you expect to see. So that's first and foremost, you need a data strategy. If you don't have a data strategy, that's a challenge in itself, but we'll just park that and say, then you need your systems and your tech stack to align to that data strategy. So what is as an example, what's your treasury system of record? For some, it's going to be your treasury management system. For others, it's going to be your ERP. For some, it's going to be both. Fair enough. Sometimes you're going to have a data warehouse or a data lake. For some, that's only a data cabin. And as a result, you need to think through what is my source of record, because what I don't want to be doing is having all these shallow processes. I want to make sure that everything is concentrated so that when I'm teaching it, when I'm receiving the benefits of that, I'm seeing, let's just say it's like cash and liquidity information in one spot so I can have the best available to it. So that's a necessity, but it's also a limitation if you don't have that data strategy completely sorted out. And a lot of organizations don't, because that idea of data strategy used to be more IT centric. Treasurers didn't used to speak that language. CFOs didn't used to, be storytellers and data officers. Now they do. Treasury needs to fall in line with that, and sometimes that's a bit of a shift. In terms of another challenge, and this is actually a big one, especially when we're talking about generative AI, we have to think about security of our data. And it's not just the protection of the data. I mean, I'm not saying that's obvious. The concept, we need to protect our data, is an obvious statement. The how to do that, generally speaking, if you have your data strategy and your tech stack aligned to that, then you know what systems you should be using. You know what the minimum standard of governance and controls should be. And you have, we'll just say the audit and controls to ensure that this aligns with our governance and our compliance internally. Presuming you have all that set up, that's not the security that we're talking about. If we don't have all that set up, we're definitely needing to have that conversation. But if assuming that you're checked off on that, then it's around the security of the information. And this is where ChatGPT and tools like it, generative AI, they have a ways to go before, maybe not ways, that makes it sound like it's years. They have some room to grow. We'll say it that way. I don't want to put a timestamp on this one. That we need almost closed language models. Large language models, by definition, are more open. If you use, say, ChatGPT, tell me a treasury policy, tell me, what I should do for disaster recovery or business continuity, and it gives you an answer. Maybe you feed a little bit more information to get more precise answer. You are helping, build that large language model, rightly so. This is open AI. It's that name for a reason. It's open source, right? So, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that inherently, except that the moment you want to start feeding data into it, a lot of treasurers have recognized or been told to recognize that maybe this is a little bit too sensitive information to give this tool, which can then integrate it into its overall data management processing and advice that it gives when you ask it questions. Like, what is a good cash flow variance, as an example? What is the right level of balances to hold in my accounts? How do I optimize, earnings credit, even very American concept, versus what I need to invest in money markets? Like, these are the sorts of things that ultimately you would expect to be asking your AI model, but you almost don't want to disclose too much. You don't want to be saying, well, we have this much cash, which may not be publicly available information, and give me the right strategy to invest that. That's where we need a little bit more security around the data so that we feel comfortable that what we are asking it is still privately held. And we're not quite there yet. So as an example, I'll give a very Kyriba-centric answer. We use ChatGPT for a lot of different things. We obviously play with it in our dev environments in a very controlled way. So we're not letting it access client data or anything like that. All sorts of the right walls exist. And so we play with that to understand what is actually happening here so that we're very conscious when we fully integrate that in the production world, that we've set the right parameters, set the right expectations, and communicate how it works. So we'll just call that, we'll call it our sandbox area. What we don't do with ChatGPT is any sort of privileged information never sees that tool yet, because we don't feel confident that it's ready for that, and we don't feel confident in terms of how that data gets used. Anything that's public facing. So as an example, like our marketing team will utilize generative AI ChatGPT for translations, and they're fantastic for that. And so as a result, those translations, because it's stuff that's publicly available on our website, there's no concern if they say, oh, that was a wonderfully written bit of text. Let's just use that next time someone asks about how to translate, this to Spanish, German, or French. These are the sorts of things you almost have to expect that is part of the public domain. And that's why I say, when I say security, it's not just, can someone hack into this flow of information from system to system? That is important, but it's what happens with my data. Do I actually cede control of my data? And am I comfortable with what that may or may not look like until there's more maturity and more provision around that aspect? So I could probably say it in different words, but in the end, data is important and we need to be sensitive to it, and we need to understand what that's providing for us.
Can I challenge that a little bit? So you mentioned that AIs, we'd be able to ask it questions on policy. What should I do with this? And what's the right way to address this? Even humans answering that question are often just providing an opinion, right? Different treasurers will come up with different strategies for the same industry, for the same company even, or for different roles, right? It's usually opinion-based as well. How good can AI be if humans can only provide an opinion? Or do you think I could do it better?
That's the question.
They have access to more data.
Is this advice, which is the world that we're wading into right now, is this better? I mean, it's not even a treasury question specifically. It's more of like, I'll just use the translation example. Does it do a better translation than, let's say, into French or Spanish than someone that's native speaking able to do? Well, maybe not. I mean, it takes an aggregation of, we'll call it opinions, and generates an output based on that. Is that better in the person's judgment? Maybe yes, maybe no. I look at that, my French is fine, but not perfect by any means. I'm not a native speaker. So I look at that translation, I think, no, that's pretty good. That'll work. Someone that natively speaks that will say, oh, no, needs to be this instead of that. Same thing with a treasury policy. The way that I would look at managing excess cash is I might have a much more conservative view in terms of retaining cash balances because I don't trust my forecast. That's going to fuel the way you look at maintaining cash in your accounts. The way you look at cross-border payments and the ability to fund pools around the globe, and your ability to do that at speed and mobilize that. And maybe it didn't work one time, a couple of years ago, so you're a little biased by that experience. These are all things that form our opinions of what we should do. What we see right now is that this offers an opinion. I liked your word on that. It's a recommendation, it's an opinion that you can choose to use or not use. And it's just the same thing, right? You can have it write an essay for you if you're in college. You can choose to use it, maybe at some risk potentially now that people are onto that, but you can choose to use it or not. Same thing with the translation, same thing with the data, same thing with any sort of interpretation, whether quantitative, empirical, or more, we'll call it language-based. That is the biggest question. Do I want to rely on this output? We're early on in the ChatGPT, generative AI, large language models. Very early. These large language models, OpenAI came out, they said, well, they were only current to 2021. Now they're becoming more current because we are basically updating it for them. Good on us. They should be thanking us for it as opposed to charging us. But point is that still, it's just an accumulation of information that gives you maybe more of a socialized response. You may not want the socialized response. You may want it as a, that's interesting. Just like if you read something on Twitter or X, about something very contentious. I may not like what everyone's saying. I may not like what the aggregate answer is. I have my own opinion. Same thing with Treasury. So I would say it's a data point, maybe something that you utilize, but that's part of where the evolution needs to come. That evolution needs to be where we know what its role is. We are confident in the data that it used to get to whatever conclusion, whether language conclusion, like a advice, recommendation, or maybe a calculation. And we need to then understand exactly how do we want to use that? Do we want the full scope of automation? I mean, to your point, we could automate everything, but do we want to? Is that safe? Does that align with our opinions and expertise around what the governance should be? These questions probably weren't asked and haven't been formulated enough, which is part of the learning that we need to do with these tools. That's why I say, is Treasury ready to fully adopt generative AI? No, because partly it's the data, partly it's the open close of the models, and then the third part is exactly what you said. Do I think this opinion is better than what I can come up with myself? And if the answer is anything other than a resounding yes, 100% of the time, then you need some sort of validation or checkpoint, which means you're not ready for complete end-to-end automation with AI.
I like that insight. I like the fact that you said it's an aggregation of opinions, and therefore can probably, as we understand it today and how we understand it going today, would only ever be as good as an aggregation of opinions. Perhaps you can bias it towards being more conservative versus being more aggressive, using your FX for just being risk adverse as opposed to speculation in the market. You could probably put some parameters in there to sway it one way or the other, but it will also be aggregation. You're never, as far as we understand it today, never going to be able to get a outlier, new to the world opinion that perhaps a human might be able to come up with. That's not the way the large language models today are set up. Is that the right way to summarize what you said?
I think it's a very good way to summarize it. And I agree wholeheartedly that we're in this journey. And as of now, if you look at generative AI is predicated on large language models. The large language model is either too large or not large enough based on the use case that we're talking about. That needs to be solved for. And so we're going to see a whole set, and I was going to say it's not an industry, it's industries plural, built upon what can this concept of generative AI be able to deliver to us. That set is going to be, exactly as we're saying here, is I need something that's an outlier. I need something that's and this is very vague language, but I need an aggressive play to reduce my cost of hedging. I want to actually look at things like parametric VAR. I want to look at what everyone else does. These are all different inputs that you can ultimately train to be able to drive what the output's going to be. Like, I hate to use that analogy, like garbage in, garbage out, because it's so obvious in itself. And it doesn't tell us everything we need to know about how we manage our data. But I will use that because it helps us it reminds ourselves that what you train it with should be very, very intentional in terms of what you expect it to do. So you may say from an FX standpoint, I know how to hedge. I know how to use a forward contract. I know how to hedge euro against USD. It's not rocket science. I learned it in school and I still do it today in real life. Like, fair enough. Tell me my worst case scenario. Maybe that's the way you want to use AI to be able to tell you what's the worst that can happen. And then train even on a scenario, which is maybe more an option-based scenario. Maybe you're comfortable using spots, forwards, and swaps, but you haven't in real life used options. You just remember them from college. Now we want to start using them. Tell me how I protect myself, because this is the guidance. This is the cash flow guidance that we need to meet for our organization, right? CFO, CEO gave us guidance quarterly ahead of time. Here's what our cash flow needs to be. We have a lot of, say, currency volatility to affect that, and we need to be in this band. How do I make sure that we're in this band? That's the kind of expectation we don't have today. I mean, just thinking, how do I ask a chatbot that and expect a good answer today? But let's just say fast forward 6 months, 9 months, 12 months from now. It's not out of the realm of expectation that it can give me some guidance of what I should be doing, perhaps even a full-fledged recommendation. And so that's where we need to, it almost becomes us as consumers, what do we want out of it will help us decide what we invest in it. And it may be certain types of tools. It may be certain types of vendors that are working in a certain direction. It might be certain sets of, we need this data, but we don't need this data. You know, it doesn't matter what everyone else in the world does. We need to make sure it's specific to us at ABC organization. I'm going to call it maturity in our thinking that we're just starting to delve into now. And if I dare say, it's also the fun part because that's what is exciting about AI. You know, I talk to treasurers about data strategy. I want to say 50% is probably more like 30, 70. A smaller percentage say, oh, that's really exciting. I'm glad you said that because no one talks to us about our data strategy. They talk to us about some sort of outcomes. Hey, you should hedge more. Hey, you should borrow more. Hey, you should, have more balances or payments through our bank. Like, these sorts of conversations that treasurers have. But you start talking about data strategy, they start, yeah, I really want to think about that. The others are, I don't want to think about that, but I do want to think about these outcomes. You need to kind of balance of what is it that I should be asking? What is it that I expect? And I said that in reverse order intentionally, because you need to start with, just like, when you're forecasting, where do I expect to be? What am I trying to accomplish with this? And then work your way backwards and plan into that. This is the same thing, is that you need to be able to understand, what do I expect AI to do for me? And your points around, what opinion do I expect? What do I not expect? Like, just what is the net result that's going to be a good thing and a positive use, and then figure out what that accumulation of tools, data, and collaboration internally to get there is going to be.
Awesome. And Bob, on our journey there, on our journey to shooting for the moon and the stars, on our journey to AI, I'd like to touch upon some features that we've seen being developed by Kyriba. And there is a large language model for treasury requests using the Kyriba API that came out a few months ago now. There was a blog post about it and an interesting video tutorial about it. Maybe before diving into this, can you, and in order to make sure that we, Hussam and I, and our audience understand everything as well, can you explain us quickly, as that's a word and an acronym that you use quite a lot, what an API is and how does it help treasurer?
Sure. Yeah, great question on APIs, because I actually really enjoy talking about it, because no one talks, I shouldn't say no one talks, but everyone talks about APIs, and it's just real-time payments or instant payments, things like that. But for our conversation, what an API is it's beside the fact it's an application programming interface, but put that aside and say what it means is that it's the ability to transfer data instantly, which is nice, but in and out of the system. So just by saying, it's another way of connecting systems together and be able to interface data on its own doesn't sound a lot different than anything we've seen. I mean, it just sounds like, isn't that what FTP does, and file transfer, and heck, even copy and paste, Control C, Control V accomplishes that sometimes. But the beauty of the API is that a couple different things. One, just in its true nature, it is in more of an instant communication. It's programmatic in the sense that you're building to a standard. So it's not like, great, I need to interface these systems during this treasury implementation. It's more like, this API exists, and this allows us to, in advance, build these two, or build a connection between these two systems. So I have a connector that's allowed to pull from here, send to here, or vice versa. So what does that mean for treasury? It means a couple of different things. One is that if your platform, and this is more of a Kyriba context, if your platform is open, when I say that open API, basically means that you have published API specifications for all these fields of information within your platform, so that someone, whether it's third party, whether it's you as the vendor, whether it's another vendor that you want to work with, so it could be consultant, it could be vendor, it could be yourselves as a provider, can build a connector to something else. So for example, like if we're talking the banking side, whether it's B of A or Chase or HSBC, or there's obviously a lot of banks, not going to go name them all to make everyone happy, but they all publish, I shouldn't say they all, there's a percentage of them right now that publish API, which someone like a Kyriba can go and connect to. More of them are coming online. And so by the end of 2023, it should be at least 50% higher than it is right now, double that for the year after, et cetera. Like, this is good adoption. So they've published an API, we build a connector, and it automatically pulls information just like a FTP script did, just like if you were over SwiftNet, same sort of thing. Then that same API concept applies to the ERP. We already connected to the ERPs using file transfer. This allows us to do the same thing, but more on a pre-built and more instant and secure basis. So let's just say it's the same thing, but a little bit better. In my opinion, anyway, the real value is where we start opening it up to all these other use cases. So when we talked at the start of the conversation about payment journey, being able to add all these different apps, third-party apps that have nothing to do with us, maybe nothing to do with the bank. They're a fintech that came up with a great idea of, I want to provide maybe additional analysis, provide AI. I have a cool little machine learning or generative AI algorithm that's very good that treasurers want. I want to be able to check sanction lists, whatever it is, the scenario. The API allows that third party, almost a marketplace ecosystem network to build out. Then, and this is the part that I think is even the best of it, which I think gets to the genesis of your question. In addition to all those use cases, it allows any of your customers, in our case, to build their own script into it or have someone do it for them. But a lot of them, the IT groups, especially the finance IT groups, look at that and say, well, we'd like to, upload payments. We want to download cash forecasts. We want to build our own data lake. We want to use your API to, let's just say, get stuff into Excel so we can do cool stuff there. I just want to have access to the data in the system that you're providing for me so I can do something with it. And that's, even though it sounds very vague in general, that's the promise what API allows, is it's sure, there's the pre-built connectors. Those are really important, and they're generally a big improvement over what you saw before. But it's the openness that suddenly this platform can be available, the data in it specifically, to a variety of other systems or use cases. And I say use cases like it might be a data lake. It was difficult. Like, how do I build a data lake? Well, great. You can access everything in the Kyriba platform that allows you to build that data lake. And then from that data lake, you can do all sorts of fun analytics, cutting and slicing. You can train it for certain use cases for AI. There's a lot of different stuff that you could potentially do on your own now that you have open access to your information. I know when I say open access, it sounds like open banking, but there's a reason why that word is used, is because it suddenly allows you more, I was going to say open access, use that word open too many times, but whatever, we'll go with it. It allows you that access of your own information that you can either have something done for you more easily, or you can do it yourself. And there's this element of self-service to manage and utilize and leverage your own data and be able to do more things with it. So to answer your question on APIs, it means all of those things. So it's connectivity to banks, connectivity to ERPs, connectivity to third-party applications, which didn't even exist before APIs, and now obviously connectivity to your own ecosystem and your own data environment. So it's all of those things, which, why does it matter for AI? It goes back to that data strategy. You don't have a data strategy until you actually have your data. And APIs are the critical tech to be able to get to that. And then that's why, obviously, from our whole development, then we can, once we have that, then we can start building fun things like integrate generative AI into our applications, utilizing APIs, be able to then use an Excel add-in that allows you to then just play like, hey, ChatGPT, do something with my data. If you want to do those sorts of things, the open API allows you to do those sorts of things.
Awesome. And Bob, maybe you already answered it partially, but let's say I'm a complete newbie in AI. So please break it down for me. If we merge this technology, this tech, the API, with LLM, and let's take the use case of Kyriba for now, can you tell us a little bit more about what it is, how it has evolved since? Because it was a few months ago, so maybe it's something completely new and even better now. But like, how do you marry this LLM for Treasury requests using the Kyriba API? How does it work?
Yeah, it's actually, there's two pieces of this to make it very simple. It's still like I would say early days, because of those restrictions that we talked about. Large language models are still, we're saying they're either too large or they're not large enough. In the case of Treasury data, because Treasury data is very sensitive, it's almost too large, too open. So in a sandbox environment, we can do anything. And I say anything as in you can immediately have that engagement. When we first talked about, what ChatGPT is, ask it a question, type in your keyboard and then, access by voice. You can do that with your Treasury system. You can do that right now. The challenge is that many of our customers, as we worked with them, expressed the exact same question that we went through a few moments ago. Do I want my information exposed to this model in its relatively early adoption state? And the consensus was no. So we're not doing that yet. Capabilities there, can absolutely do it. You want to throw away your mouse and your keyboard and start talking to your Treasury system? Yeah, we could support that today. And that's the kind of thing that you were talking about. APIs allow that to happen. The AI embedded into that environment, it works. Beautiful thing. It's a lot of fun to play with. But in terms of production needs more maturity in the technology in terms of the large language model and the security and governance around the data, in terms of, do I want, like as an example, do I want to ask the simple question, why was my cash flow variance this high? Or am I going to meet my cash flow targets with the dollar doing what it's doing in the currency markets, or the euro doing what it's doing? Like, these are the sorts of things with rates, with bringing in some external data, bringing in some internal stuff. Do I want the large language model to have that information? Overwhelmingly, treasurers say not yet. They're very excited about the automation. Yes, I want to talk to it. Yes, I want to ask it questions. Yes, I don't want to have to click on reports and dashboards and be able to lasso that information, be able to drill down 3 levels because the CFO is asking something. I'd rather just, hey, CFO, ask the Treasury system your question directly and it answer. That's what I want as a treasurer. But I'm not quite ready for the exposure of information that is required to allow that to happen. So I've seen some examples in real life where people have built ChatGPT into it. I've also heard from the same people that are exposed to that to say it seemed like a little bit too risky for us. In Treasury, we're not in the business of adding risk. Not as a vendor, not as a Treasury professional. We're not at that point. There's some parts of the organization that absolutely take on risk. Very normal. In Treasury, though, we have to, as we know, mitigate risk. Like, what are the 3 things we do in Treasury, right? We see, right? We want to see everything. We want visibility. We protect. Right up with there. I want to see my forecast, but oh man, I need to protect it. And in fact, most people will kind of put that in reverse order. Protect, and then see it, which I know is hard because you got to see it first, to protect. But you get the idea. See, protect, grow, which is basically Treasury's mandate and CFO's mandate too. Protect is right there. We have to be risk mitigators. And so as a result, as the technology evolves, it won't be long before everyone can have this as a reality, as a mainstay. But it's not there yet. And I look forward to that because it's a lot of fun. But you need to have that governance. Governance in Treasury is the most paramount thing. I mean, it's why everyone still looks at the SOC 2, Type 2, as like the gold standard that every Treasury vendor needs to provide, because they need to ensure that my entire product, including the AI, is part of this and has been assessed by a third party so that we're not doing anything from an audit and control standpoint that is outside of the governance that we have agreed with our auditors and our internal IT that we are signing up for. So that's a long answer to your relatively short and really insightful question. But it shows where we are today. The technology, early days, it shows a lot of promise. But there's some challenges that need to be overcome. I mean, we could have swapped this out and talked about cryptocurrency and blockchain. And some of the same things, the general statements we're making, it's got a lot of room to go. There needs to be some governance. There needs to be risk mitigation. I need to ensure that the volatility is not going to affect my liquidity and my ability to protect value. Swap in your favorite technology word, AI, blockchain, crypto. It all almost kind of sounds similar for a reason, is because we need to ensure the governance is there. So yes, we're having a great time playing with it, and we love doing that. The AI that we've introduced into our platform is very controlled, and it's also, organically developed by us so that we're in a position where we can provide complete assurance to our clients that there is no risk being added. I don't think there's anything more important than that when you're dealing with, in the real world with customers. When you're playing in a sandbox environment, boy, you have a lot of fun with all that. But you just need to be mindful of the bigger picture and holistically, what is it that I'm signing up for?
I'm a little too young to be there for it. Unfortunately, Bob, I'm guessing Treasury departments just said the same thing when email came along. And they had to stop using paper and hard copies to transfer data between themselves and the CFO. It's like, how can I put it on the internet and send it over to the CFO? That's insane.
I love that statement, because there's a certain irony in that, is that where it's probably not as much now, but let's say rewind just a handful of years, and a lot of the spear phishing, fraud and payment fraud attempts, and a lot of them would be started by an email. So there's sort of this irony that wow, we introduced some risk via email. Now, I've never heard a treasurer say, whoa, back to pen and paper and Post-it note. But that said, it is kind of an interesting analogy where we do need to appreciate and find a way to manage the risk. I mean, if you think of, this goes more to the API point than the AI, but if you think of APIs and say just something as simple as instant payments, which we're seeing all over, we see FedNow and RTP in the US. We see a variety of networks. PayNow in Singapore, one of my favorite, because it actually links with some, middleware-ish to other regional networks in the region. So suddenly you have a little bit of cross-border instant payments, which makes me super excited. But you look at that real-time journey, you need to ensure that your processes are caught up. And so, I've heard people say real-time payments, real-time fraud. Well, that's really not accurate. But you do need to ensure that if you're adopting instant payments, or you're doing things in real time, that your process is also operating at machine speed in real time. This is the same thing. We adapted to email. We figured out, ironically, ChatGPT helps a little bit in this, or makes it a little bit scarier if you think of more linguistically complex fraudulent schemes through that email. Suddenly it's not so hard to see, or not so easy to catch anymore. We can use ChatGPT to iron some of those things out. But the same thing goes for any process and any technology we're talking about, is if you're going to do things faster, you need to ensure that your protections are in better place. And so I think, I like the email analogy because it was fantastic. Yes, Treasury got over it eventually. And then they said, well, wait a second. See, I told you so. Look, now we're getting fraud attempts by email. So there's going to be a lot of that back and forth with AI. I think any treasury organization, I know some that start to use this, but cautiously, there'll probably be at some point a little bit more adoption there. And then there'll be a little bit of a pullback. Like, whoa, wait a second. Look, something bad happened. I'm not even hypothesize what that would be. And then we need to retrench and just hold it a little bit until we solve that. And then we'll kind of keep going forward. So I think if I get the hidden meaning within your question, which I think is the really important message here, is that there is an element of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And anytime you're risk averse, that is going to be the case. I feel like if you're from a vendor perspective, and that's what we take our responsibility seriously, is that we want to ensure that those are two good steps forward and not trying to do it too quickly so that we innovate ahead of the controls and the protection of the data in the process. You have to think that way first, which is less fun, I would agree, but more important when we're talking about something as sensitive as cash, liquidity, and risk management.
So my background was in like implementing technology into different businesses, right? Different types of technology. And the departments where we came in to try and upgrade their systems, help them innovate, help cost save through technology. The ones that were more risk adverse were just inherently further behind in their, let's say, technology maturity. And the ones that were more risky, perhaps they had a few more big collapses every now and then, and there were some big whatevers, but over time they became much leaner, much faster, and became much more efficient in a lot of ways, and safer eventually also. Treasury being inherently a risk avoidance department within the company, well, do you think it will always be a little bit behind? Well, like, will AI penetrate Treasury last in the modern company, or?
It's a good question. I don't know if it'll be last. It won't be first, which is maybe the answer you're looking for on that, but it won't be first. I don't think it'll be very last because I can definitely think of some laggards that are more risk averse than Treasury. But it's a point that's well taken. I mean, I've been in this space for 25 years and I've seen everything that you just described inside and outside of Treasury. It's a perfectly placed observation because you need to have some trailblazing. You need to be able to put something a little bit ahead to change. You know, the idea of digital transformation. I'm not sure Treasury still calls it DX. The rest of the company does, but I think Treasury still calls it transformation because it just sounds a little bit more formal that way. Because they're not necessarily evolved to absolutely go all in on a transformation of process. I mean, I look at something as simple as cash forecasting. I'd say 50% of cash forecasts are probably little changed from what they were a decade or two ago. And forget the 2 decades ago. Let's just focus on the last 10 years. What's happened in the last 10 years in terms of availability of information, the ability to connect information, the volatility in the market? I mean, all of us have probably seen some of this roller coaster volatility over the years, but there's a lot of people in Treasury that never saw 2008, 2009 and have no concept in terms of the controls, the regulation, the rate rising that we saw in the past 12 months, the volatility in the markets. And I know a lot of that's unprecedented. It's been a roller coaster in the past year, but a lot of people have just seen a very flat, constant world in terms of, say, how do I manage my cash? You know, banks always lend money. It was pretty cheap and our cost of capital was always low. Now that's not the case. And, you know, we have the Fed telling us still not going to be the case. You know, get used to it, figuratively. And as a result, these are the sorts of things where there is an element of we can't just do status quo. So I'm not advocating that market volatility and economic trauma are good things, but they do force a little bit different pattern of thinking to your question. And will that unlock a lot of the risk aversion? Not necessarily, but it will force a new way of thinking around how to make decisions in Treasury. And that new way of thinking is data-driven. Every forward-looking organization, you go to AFP conference, you go to Eurofinance, you go to all these particular events, and all the sessions are about how do I inject data into my process? How do I become more data-centric? I mean, these are, they're almost buzzwords that get thrown out, but people are starting to listen to those to then chip away at the legacy way of doing things that you were talking about. So will Treasury be first? No. But I think there's, as a strategic partner to the CFO, as the team and then individuals, the treasurer, that realize I get to answer the question of what happens when our customers stop paying us. And say with COVID, 3 years ago and wind back to 2020, Treasury was asking how many days of liquidity, or they were answering, I should say, how many days of liquidity do we have left, which was asked not by the CFO, sometimes not by the CEO, but sometimes by the board. And so these big questions were being asked, which suddenly put a spotlight on a team that never had a spotlight, that never had a reason to change. The only time that people noticed them is when something went wrong. And so that's a lot of reinforcement to not change. That's paradigm is shifting. And that culture is shifting. And I see more treasurers that grew up thinking, I don't have to do the things that were done before. To be successful, I need to put my mark of transformation on this entity and organization. So yes, I see a shift, but not a complete abandonment of risk aversion. Risk mitigation will always be there, even when it comes to technology adoption. And that's coming from me on the tech side. So my wish is that it's a little bit different, but we'll get there.
Bob, thank you so much for that. That makes a lot of sense. When we look at most of the surveys going out lately, we see that cash flow forecasting is one, if not the top priority of the treasurers. And you just mentioned it with the board, with the CFOs, also of the CFOs and even above there. How can we get AI to power cash flow forecasting when we say that's the top priority of everybody? So maybe that's where the innovation should be implemented first. What's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I like that. And I like getting back to that because it's fun to talk about all the, what it should be, etc. But let's talk practically about, can this help me today in Treasury? And I feel like the next 12 months look like this for cash forecasting, is that there's three things that we need to get better at in forecasting. We need better predictability. We need to be able to generate new information that we may not have today. And then we need automation. There's always automation, right? So we can never have this discussion without the automation. In terms of prediction, here's where we're seeing AI. I want to say right now, but it's also a right now going forward, is the use case is I have information right now. I have data that I say I have a forecast. Maybe it's a good forecast. Maybe it's average. Maybe it's exceptional. You ask any treasury professional if their forecast is exceptional, they're going to say yes, just because they want to make sure they don't want to show weakness for good reason. But whatever that level of confidence is, there is a confidence interval that you have. Speaking super data centric when I say that, but you have a confidence interval in your forecast. You want it to be better. And this is where AI can really come back. So we talked much earlier on about what are the different ways that we can utilize and learn from our data. Number one is to make that prediction of here's the data I have, here's the data I need. I want to have a much more, like a higher level of confidence in when customers are going to pay us, going back to that receivables example we talked about a while ago. I want to have a better level of confidence around what cash flow is hitting my account compared to what was actually going to, like my ERP told me. So this is when I say predictability, is that I have a set of data, I have amount, I have date, I have other categorization information. I want an improved amount, and I want an improved date. So that's predictability. Give me, based on everything you've observed in our payment patterns or receivables patterns or both, whatever category and line item that we're using in our forecast, because each one is going to be treated a little bit differently. Tell me, what is this going to look like? Here's the inputs. The inputs just, or an import from my ERP, or an import from the regional CFOs around the organization, wherever you got your data, of course, by APIs, because I think we covered that point. And how do I make this data better? So that's predictability. Improve the confidence, make better predictions in my existing data. And the key is existing data. Okay, I have something, I just want to make it better, more usable, so I can actually make more refined decisions. Ideally, in this sort of higher interest rate environment, those decisions are, I leave less cash in the bank doing very little, and I make it more active. Maybe I'm investing it, maybe I'm investing in the organization and not just investing in money market. Maybe I'm doing other things. But the point is that having a better understanding of both how much cash do I have right now, how much cash do I have in 1 week, how much do I have in 1 month, how much do I expect to have in 12 months, so we can provide better guidance. I need a better forecast. I have data existing. I need to improve it. So that's number one. Number two is a use case that Treasury typically struggles a lot with. That's generating new data, as in data we don't have. We're not improving anything because we don't have it. I'd like to use M&A as an example of this. So with mergers and acquisitions, you're acquiring a business, or you might be divesting and spinning one off. Either way, there's something that's different than what you had before. You might have some proxies. Let's just say if you were an organization expanding to a new country, you might have countries that share similar characteristics that we can use as a proxy, but it's not going to be exactly the same. Or you might have, I have sales figures, projected sales figures. I don't have cash flow information, but I do have a relationship in other markets or other years where I could look at the correlation between sales information and cash flow information. I have something, is the point, that I can use to then create a whole new data set of, when we're talking about cash forecasting, expected cash flows. There's other use cases too, expected payables, expected receivables, how many bank accounts would I need, how many signatories for those bank accounts. You can imagine the world, as we really think about AI, can get quite big. But just for the cash forecast, I want to predict how much cash will we generate from this M&A, market entry, something that didn't exist before. AI is perfect for this because it allows you to digest multiple sets of information, including correlations, and be able to spit out and generate something new. And it's a starting point. Sam, you asked that great question before about opinions. It's an opinion, quantitative, it's using data, it's empirical, but nonetheless, it's still an opinion of what might happen. You still will want that flexibility to override that and say, excellent starting point. Now we're going to augment it with something else, which is exactly how Treasury behaves right now anyway. Everyone's cash forecast is a combination of different sources of that forecast. AI is not the be-all end-all. It's a source alongside other sources. But in this case, it's a source that might be actually a really good starting point in certain scenarios. So that's number two. It kind of looks and feels like, hey, I'm just generating more data, etc. But in fact, I'm enriching existing data for better predictive power versus creating new data that I didn't have around, say, the cash forecast or whatever else. Then the third part gets back to some of the stuff we talked about before in terms of the automation. How do I, and this is where I love generative AI, how do I automate as much of that as possible? Because anyone that, let's just say, tuned in the last 5 minutes of the podcast and they didn't hear that we were talking about AI, and they just heard talking about, look at all this data and we're going to predict, we're going to take it from the ERP and then we're going to augment it. And then for M&A, my goodness, we have correlation between sales and cash flow. And their mind just blew up into many pieces because they thought, how am I going to do that? That's why the automation part is absolutely key. That's what's so interesting, in my opinion anyway, about generative AI, is because it offers us that pathway into much more greater degree of automation. We can basically say, I want to, let's pretend we're using Excel. So everyone loves spreadsheets, right? I have my data in my Treasury Management System. I want to extract that into, say, Excel. Could be Power BI, could be Google Studio, could be Click on it, doesn't matter. But I'm going to say Excel for fun. I extract it into Excel, and then I do all my little wizardry, otherwise known as AI, to create new data sets. And then I bring that back into my Treasury Management System. I want the wizardry, the AI, to be automated, of course. I think we've kind of solved that one. But I also want the extract and the reintegration of that data alongside the other data to be completely automated, so I don't have an analyst spending 8-12 hours of time making maybe mistakes along the way, because we know how that works in spreadsheets. I don't want that. I want this to be a complete seamless process. And that's the key, that generative AI completes the picture. And we didn't have that promise before. And so I think that's where, a lot of us could envision, like 5 years ago, I could have told you predictability, better predictability. Yeah, and of course, AI is going to do that. I could have probably told you new data sets if we thought about that. Like, yeah, okay, I guess so. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that. Seems like a lot of data to massage and make work, but okay, I'm with you on the ride. How do I automate all this? I don't know how that's going to work. We're talking about thousands and maybe tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of records. That sounds very intensive. Sounds like a lot of problems. That's the full circle. The automation is the absolute key to making this a reality for Treasury. Otherwise, it was just sort of, to your point earlier, it's a bit more fictional. It was a bit more, I see it, but I can't touch it. That's where the technology has really evolved in the last 12 months to allow us a window of what the next 12 months looks like. The next 12 months looks like all of this is possible with automation. And then once we solve that governance and data security standpoint, then we're going to feel much more comfortable using these tools. And maybe there's this concept of closed language models becomes more of a construct or a label. Maybe it's the embedded tools and we're only utilizing our data to train a generative model. Maybe the large language model is large language model within our organization. There's room for that growth that we need to see, but ultimately the tool, the technology allows us to see, here's what's possible, and yes, it is actually possible. So it kind of merges the probable and possible so that we see, yeah, sure, it's possible. There's a star up there and I can see it. Someday I'll be able to touch it maybe, but it actually brings our probable and possible a little bit closer together when it comes to AI.
And again, do you really draw the limitation at the final phase of needing a human eye? So with all that said, one thing you never said was, do you think AI will ever get to that stage where a human would need to do that?
I think the answer is yes for everywhere. I hate to say that because everyone listening thinking, oh, come on, just say no. Say the people are needed always, forever. We have a career path to think about. I certainly, this goes to any level of automation. It's not a uniquely AI answer. Is that AI, like any productivity tool, is that there's certain things that we do right now that are too manual, that take too long, that can be augmented and improved. And so this is no different. For a period of time, probably, I hate to say it, I could date myself really easily on this one. And suddenly, the shelf life of our conversation is, 12 months because all the assumptions change. But you could foresee for the next 5 to 10 years that Treasury is highly involved in the input, the creation of the process, and the review and integration of the output. Doesn't mean that the manual parts can't happen. Like everything I described in terms of basically identifying the data, extracting it, doing things with it, we call it wizardry for fun, and then reintegration of that. All of that can be automated with Treasury still very involved in assessing, does this make sense? So for the foreseeable future, and this is where I qualify it, asterisk, foreseeable, because that may not be as long as we think. But for the foreseeable future, Treasury and in its entirety still has a significant role to play to ensure that the data influence is helping make better decisions. At some point, people will become intermediated. And as a result, we will probably see a lesser Treasury team at some point in the future. I don't envision that's in the 2020s. I figure that it's beyond that. Probably right around the same time that we don't need to actually drive our car. I mean, because we all kind of look at that, right? Like we all have our kids thinking, well, they won't, they need a driver's license. Well, some of these same levels of thinking need to apply into the financial enterprise software world and the Treasury world as well. At some point, we won't need to, I know that this is a rewind example. At some point, we won't need to log into our bank portals to see how much money is in our bank accounts. Shocker. Well, that happened. Treasury still had a job. In fact, Treasury arguably is even more strategic to the business now than they were then. Every time that automation comes, it takes something away, but then it adds a new level of analysis. That analysis phase will, for the foreseeable future, always be there. At some point, AI will probably develop, or it'll blow up into pieces and never develop that way. But something will happen that will answer that question of, can AI be also the analytical resource? Can AI do the decisions and we just set the boundaries and the guardrails and allow AI to do everything within those guardrails? It's either going to happen or, as I said, it's going to blow up into a million pieces and then we're going to realize, oh, we should never have trusted it to anything close to that. I kind of think it's a continual automating of the roles and a continual I'll just say more greater experience, greater intelligence, greater EQ, Treasury responsibilities will be the outcome of that, just like it has been over the last 2 decades. I could be proven wrong. As I said, we might find out in 6 months that shelf life of that statement is just completely over. But I do feel like we've seen what productivity looks like. We have a template for that. We've seen what automation of connectivity and sharing between systems looks like. We can envision what better sharing of information looks like. APIs are much more, not completely, but much more adopted than they were even 3 years ago. Hasn't changed tremendously, except that it improves the availability of data and transfer between systems, and the speeds up some of the processing. What it doesn't do is take people out of their jobs. It just repositions them. So I feel somewhat safe that that's the right answer, hoping that I don't get too much flack for say at some point we're going to be much more disintermediated, but that's not going to be unique to Treasury. Treasury is not like, there's other jobs that change well before Treasury does. You know, bus drivers probably have more to worry about than Treasury professionals that are trying to understand, shouldn't I do this to protect my cash?
Super interesting. So bring us back to then the medium phase, right? Like the Treasury professional today that's perhaps looking at their next, be optimistic in 5 to 10 years on the shelf life of their job being AI integrated into their workflow. And we're going to see more and more of that, right? And Kyriba is already doing a lot in that vein specifically. How is Kyriba guiding its clients towards integrating AI into the workflow processes? Like, can you provide examples of where AI integration has helped Treasury operations already, or use cases that you see like in the immediate future that are going to become a reality in your plan?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's everything that we focus on and that we communicate to our customers, and even those that haven't been customers, but we hope might become one. It is all focused on supporting their data strategy. And I know I've used those words before. It's APIs, AI, analytics, typically in that order, because we need to bring data together for them. We need to have AI to be augmented in a variety of processes, which I'll get into in a little bit. And then analytics is that key, which is still, we can provide much more insight and intelligence about what AI-driven and generated data alongside other sources means and what we do with it. So it kind of provides that actionability, if you will, which is so missing in Treasurers' lives today. So we emphasize a lot that it's a data strategy and it's making that data strategy actionable. And so your Treasury platform should be, it should be doing all of that for you. It should be providing the APIs. It should provide the AI either through an API, because there's a great app out there that really helps and customers want to have, or just embedded in part of, the organic development of the platform. And then the analytics to support that so that you can understand, to the point of what we need Treasury to do. We need it to analyze the opinions that are provided by AI alongside other predictive technologies. So what we're doing in terms of AI specifically is the 2 use cases that Treasury cares about the most. Cash forecasting, because we talked about that a few times. That's critical. Everything I talked about, that's either there or it's there imminently, because predictive power, generation of new data, and then the automation to ensure that is implementable. It's not a great word. I know you came from the implementation side. Can't believe they created a word just around implementation, but implementable. But it's realizable. And so making that is available to every customer that wants that is our immediate path. And that's what we tell people, is that if you want AI, we're going to provide that in a safe environment. Secure, governed. We're not going to inject technology that has not met the internal controls and internal governance of your IT team, as well as ours. So we obviously make sure anything we do, even if it's connectivity, is productized. And it's within our SOC 2 Type 2, because we know that everyone needs that level of governance. AI is no different. So cash forecasting, do that. Payment fraud, payment detection, absolutely do that. Get into the area of providing more analytics, like what does this mean? Again, AI plays a role in that, serving up the analysis so that you can go, here's what this means. Here's the impact of hedging let's just say, the Swiss franc on my euro exposures? How does it affect my parametric VAR? What does this mean in terms of my cost of hedging? And utilizing AI to help do some of the automation, going back to that part, of making sense of all this information. So it's in every use case, we can imagine all sorts of them. Generation of data, predictability of data, automation of all that together, so you have the analysis in your hand. And that's our mantra and mission around AI as part of the data strategy. And so that mission could exist if AI wasn't there. There's some things that are programmatic and rules-based as well. Our mission doesn't change. We're supporting your data strategy, and we're injecting the tools that you need securely to be able to support that mission.
Well, bring us home with like the merger of everything we just talked about. Predictive AI, generative AI, how it needs automation in order to process correctly. What is beyond that in Treasury? How, like, make us dream? For instance, can it generate complete new information, but that would be close to reality? Like expanding in new countries, for instance, I'm thinking of that. Can AI in Treasury take us there?
Absolutely. Absolutely it can. So I like that question because it needs to be precise and specific for Treasury, anyone in Treasury to say, oh, I get it. I mean, that was the beauty of ChatGPT in the first place. When we all saw it, it's suddenly, oh, I see that if I type something in, it gives me an answer. I get it. The same thing goes for Treasury. The moment that you are able to see, this is a better cash forecast amount around my receivables, I actually can then reconcile that. And of course, you should have those tools in every Treasury platform to actually understand the variance of your forecast. But the AI version of that predictability gave a better result. Week by week, over a 13-week forecast, I had a better result. That reinforces what, a client should expect. Same thing, let's just say Slovenia, just a wonderful place. If I need to ensure that I am expanding to this wonderful location and I need to use data from accessory countries to be able to do that, you need to see that in action. And yes, the Treasury system, as it supports that, like we support that, then you're a believer. And I think that's kind of like the missing equation, is you can speak in generalities all day long. Like, it's going to do this, it's going to do this, it's going to be wonderful, it's going to give you better predictability. Well, show me it. And that's what every customer that we talk to is saying, show me what it does and show me that it's better, because it's all a connected conversation. Prove to me that AI can do better than what I do now. And that's where the data journey from, here's what I'm trying to achieve, I'm going to use AI instead of something else, or maybe I didn't have anything at all, in which case, of course, it's going to be better. But generally, you're comparing it against something, and then show me that it was more impactful. Show me that it actually was a better predictive element of what my cash was going to look like 6 months down the road. And that's the proof point that everyone needs. And that's what we work with our customers on, is understand. It's not just saying, hey, we got AI. Like, our marketing team can just say, hey, we got AI across all these different things. It doesn't mean anything until you start doing what we just described. And everyone has different tolerances and what their level of adoption is. Some are early adopters and they say, absolutely. If you have an innovation lab, I want to be in it. Others are, well, I want to make sure that 90% of the rest of your customers did this until I'm actually going to even engage in it. And there's nothing wrong with that either. So the proof has to be there. And that's the stage that we're in right now, is that all the tools are there. Everything works for many different use cases and it's live in production and across most of these use cases. But we're still treating individual client scenarios as let's prove it for you, and set up a process where it's not just, oh, look, AI did something. It's almost like parallel testing. Show me a scenario with AI, show me the scenario without AI, and let's see who won that race at the end of the day. And that's part of the learning that needs to happen. AI, to your question earlier on opinions, it is not better every time, because all we're trying to do is provide some more a better essence, better capture of historical information, and a better probability of what should happen based on what has happened historically, either directly or using a set of proxy information, doesn't mean it will happen. I mean, if it did, then the first use case for AI would have been what happens to the stock markets, because give me certainty around that and I'm a winner. The same thing goes here, is that we're trying to see, does this give us, for our business, for the needs we have, for the fact that Treasury is now responsible for forecasting 12 months instead of for a 13-week, does it give us something better than we're doing today? And the answer is yes, you're going to keep doing that. The answer is no, we're going to figure out why it doesn't and see if there's different elements of that model that need to be a little different. Maybe we trained it in a bad way. Maybe we tried to train it with information from 2020, which we know is an anomaly of all anomalies when it comes to cash and liquidity. Maybe we tried to train it and realized that maybe we shouldn't have done that. Maybe we didn't have the right proxy information to create a synthetic set to train the data. All of these are open questions. So when we think of, is it just a plug and play? No, it's not a plug and play, but it's a tool like anything else that needs to be considered alongside what you have now for better predictability or forecast, and to help with those, I'm going to say unique scenarios, but those irregular scenarios where I need new data that I just do not have anything that gives me a good starting point.
But that was all both a masterclass and also eye-opening and also inspiring. We also have a newsletter where we try to go through all these concepts around AI and Treasury and whatnot, but I think you did a better job than we have been for the last couple of months in our writing. So thank you very much for that. And is there anything that we didn't ask you that you would like to share that Treasury professionals, and now we're talking about all spectrums of people in their Treasury career, tend to listen to this podcast? Is there anything that Treasury professionals should know about AI in Treasury?
They
haven't touched on it.
I feel we probably touched on it, but I'll have to reiterate it, is that data is the currency or the commodity that you need to own and manage in order to make any of this successful. And whether it's artificial intelligence or people intelligence, you need to become data-centric in Treasury. And for anyone that sees that opportunity in front of them in their career path to think, ooh, there's an opportunity for digital transformation here, you're probably right. There's a whole source. I mean, just listening to podcasts like this as an example, or even newsletters, you're going to get a wealth of information around what other people are doing. Sometimes in Treasury, we talked about this a few times, but sometimes that crowdsourcing of intelligence and experience is what's going to push Treasury forward, especially those that have more legacy processes or legacy decision-making. AI is new, it's scary, but it's not as scary as it used to be because of some of the advancements we've seen in the very recent past. And so, like anything, understand what you need, understand what your gaps are, understanding what your internal stakeholders, IT is part of this, and compliance as well, and audit. Make sure that everyone's constituent in this so that what you do is actually something that can be reused in your operation. And that's why, touched on that governance and compliance and security of data becomes so paramount. So I think be data-centric and understand what that means for your organization, and you'll find that AI really can do a lot for you.
That's a perfect wrap-up. Thank you so much, Bob. If listeners want to learn more about you or Kyriba's AI innovation or Treasury solutions, where should they go?
Just go to Kyriba.com. We have, I think, a fun wealth of information across AI, across APIs, across data, across anything. So yeah, feel free to visit with us, engage with us, come visit us at events, whatever you want. We like these conversations. They're a lot of fun for us.
Amazing. And we'll tag that and your personal LinkedIn as well in the show notes below. And thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you. It's a fun conversation, really.
Thank you so much.